Picture this. It's 1933. 1 in 4 Americans has no job. Banks are shutting their doors overnight. Families are sleeping in cardboard boxes. A loaf of bread costs a nickel, but most people do not have a nickel. But here's the part nobody tells you. On the same street where men are standing in soup lines, there is a woman. She's not in line. She's turning people away. She has more work than she can handle. And she is charging the neighborhood banker, the same banker who just lost everything, to fix his family's clothes. She does not own gold. She does not own stocks. She owns a needle, a thread, and a skill. And that skill made her more financially secure than most college-educated men around her. This video is about her and 5 other people just like her, and the specific skills they had that you can learn right now that made ordinary people untouchable during the worst economic crash in American history. Stay with me, because the 5th skill is the one nobody talks about, and it might be the most important thing you hear all year. Before we get into the skills, you need to understand what was actually happening in 1929, because most people get this completely wrong. They think the Depression was just bad times, like a rough patch, like a bad winter that eventually ended. It was not that. On October 24th, 1929, Black Thursday, the stock market dropped so fast that $10 billion disappeared in a single afternoon. In today's money, that is roughly $100 billion. Gone. In hours. But here's the part that hit ordinary people hardest. 9,000 banks failed. Not 9, not 90, 9,000. And when a bank failed in 1929, there was no government protection on your savings. No FDIC, no safety net. You walked up to the window and your money was simply gone. Everything you saved, your whole life, had gone overnight. By 1933, 4 years after the crash, 25% of working Americans had no job, 1 in 4. And of the people who did have a job, more than half were only working part-time. A factory worker was earning about $17 a week. Then their factory closed. Then there was nothing. Here's what makes this so relevant to you right now. Americans today are carrying over $17 trillion in household debt. Housing costs have tripled in 20 years. A third of Americans say they could not survive 1 month without a paycheck. And 33% of people in a recent survey said they genuinely fear a total economic collapse is coming. The people of 1933 thought exactly the same thing. And most of them were right. But some of them were ready. And they were ready because of skills. Not gold, not silver, not savings accounts. Skills. Let me show you 5 of them. Before skill 1, I want you to know something that shocked me when I found it. During the deepest years of the Depression, the people who stayed employed longest, the people who never stood in a breadline, were not the ones with the most money saved. They were the ones with the most useful hands. Here is why. Skill 1, the repair. Skill. The mechanic who never missed a day of work. In a small town in Ohio in 1931, a mechanic named Walter did not lose his job when the factory closed. He just changed his customer. See, when money gets tight, people stop buying new things, but they cannot stop using the things they already own. Cars still break down. They just cannot afford new ones. So suddenly the mechanic becomes the most important person in town. Not the banker, not the store owner, the mechanic. There's a documented pattern from this era. Workers with advanced skills were less likely to be hurt during the Depression. Not executives, not managers, skilled workers. Here is why this matters so much. When the economy is good, people buy new things. When the economy crashes, people fix old things. And the person who knows how to fix old things becomes the person everybody needs. A skilled auto mechanic in 1932 could earn more in barter trades in a week than most unemployed men earned in a month. He fixed your car. You gave him food from your garden. He fixed your neighbor's furnace. They gave him firewood for the winter. Men with mechanical knowledge repaired tools, stoves, or automobiles in exchange for food or fuel. Skills became a form of currency. The skill is not just fix cars. The skill is knowing how things work so you can fix them when they break. Today, most people cannot fix anything. Their phone breaks, they buy a new one. Their appliance breaks, they throw it away. Their car makes a noise, they call someone else. The person in your neighborhood who knows how to fix things, who understands mechanical systems, is sitting on a skill that historically becomes more valuable every time the economy gets worse. And here's the thing that makes this skill so powerful. You can start learning it right now for free. YouTube has thousands of free repair tutorials. Every skill you learn to fix is a skill that cannot be inflated away. But the repair skill is actually the least powerful of the 5. The next one is different, because it did not just help people survive. It made them the most sought-after person in their entire community. What if I told you that during the Depression, one skill made the person who had it so valuable that neighbors would literally line up at their door with food, fuel, and cash? And it is not a skill that most people associate with wealth at all. Skill 2, the food growing skill. the family that never went hungry. In 1933, the average American family in a city was spending almost 35% of their income on food, which sounds manageable until you realize that most of them had no income at all. But there was a family in rural Pennsylvania, and their story was documented by their grandchildren, who not only fed themselves through the entire Depression, but fed 11 of their neighbors too. They had a garden, not a flower garden. A serious, year-round food production system. Families adapted by growing their gardens, canning and preserving, and wasting little food. Here is the specific thing they did that most people did not. They did not just grow food. They grew the right food. Food that could be stored. Food that kept. Food that could be traded. Potatoes, beans, root vegetables, cabbage, the crops that Depression-era families called insurance crops because they kept you alive when everything else failed, and then they learned to preserve it. Canning, pickling, fermenting, salt curing. Skills that took produce from a 1-week shelf life to a 1-year shelf life. During the Great Depression, housewives could be judged by how many jars they had put up during harvest season. The more jars on your shelf, the more secure your family was. But here is the wealth angle that nobody talks about. Once you can produce more food than your family needs, you have something to trade. And in a cash-scarce economy, food is the most liquid currency there is. The family in Pennsylvania was trading preserved vegetables for shoes, firewood, and medical care. They were essentially running a local currency system out of their root cellar. The woman who could grow and preserve food became the wealthiest person on her street. Not because she had money, but because she had something everyone needed and nobody could buy. Today, 50 million Americans have a backyard. Most of them grow grass. The skill of serious food production has almost completely disappeared from mainstream culture. Today, with a growing urban population, it's less common to possess basic gardening knowledge. We've lost that skill overall in our culture, but the knowledge still exists. The seeds still exist. The techniques still exist. And every single year when food prices go up, this skill becomes more valuable. There's a third skill, though, and this one surprises people every time because it looks ordinary. But historically, it paid better than almost anything else. What skill did a Depression-era woman have that paid her more per week than most men who still had factory jobs? The answer is not what you think. Skill 3, the fabric and clothing skill. Let me give you a number that will put this in context. The seamstress who turned cloth into cash. In 1933, a new men's suit cost about $8. That was half a week's wages for most working men. Half a week. People simply could not buy new clothes, but they still needed to wear clothes. Children kept growing. Work clothes kept wearing out. And the old ways of dealing with worn clothing, buying new, suddenly became impossible. Enter the seamstress. Clothing was expensive and rarely replaced during the Depression. One shirt or dress had to last for years, and skilled seamstresses earned money by altering, repairing, or sewing garments for others. A local seamstress who could shorten, lengthen, take in, and let out a piece of clothing had a skill most everyone in the community needed. A skilled seamstress could earn steady income throughout the entire Depression. Not because she was lucky, not because she knew the right people, because she had a skill that created value from almost nothing. Worn-out adult clothes became children's clothes. Flour sacks became shirts. Old curtains became dresses. Yarn and fabric were sometimes repurposed from worn-out clothing as a way to reduce costs. Here's what makes this historically remarkable. This skill, sewing, altering, making, was so economically valuable during the Depression that it supported entire families and communities, where the men could find no work at all. Women with this skill were often the primary breadwinners of their households, not out of desperation, out of genuine demand for what they could do. And here is the modern angle. Today, almost nobody knows how to sew beyond the most basic repairs. Fast fashion has made us completely dependent on factories and supply chains. One serious disruption to those supply chains, like the ones we saw in 2020 and 2022. And suddenly, the person who can make and repair clothing becomes the person everyone needs. A basic sewing machine costs less than $100. The skills to use it can be learned in a month. And historically, those skills have supported families through the worst economic conditions in modern American history. But skill 4 is the one I find most fascinating, because it completely reverses how most people think about financial security. Everything I've shown you so far is about hands-on skills, making things, fixing things, growing things. But the fourth skill has nothing to do with any of that. It is a social skill, a community skill, and during the Depression, it generated more consistent income than almost any trade. Skill 4, the trust and trade skill, the barter network that kept a whole street fed. Here is something they do not teach in school about the Great Depression. When cash disappeared, communities did not collapse into chaos. Many of them invented new economic systems from scratch. They bartered, but not random bartering. organized, systematic, community-based exchange networks. And the people who built and ran these networks, the people who knew everybody, who could connect the man with the surplus eggs to the woman who needed eggs in exchange for doing laundry, those people became wealthy in the truest sense of the word. In many towns, skills were pooled informally. A person known for shoe repair might serve the entire neighborhood, while someone else became the trusted mechanic or seamstress. This is where a good reputation and reliability helped create opportunity. When money was scarce, people chose to work with those they trusted. Think about what that means. Trust was currency. Reputation was currency. Being known as the person who could be relied on, who always delivered what they promised, was more valuable than having money in a bank that might close tomorrow. Barter thus transformed personal ability into economic capital, enabling survival through contribution rather than possession. These systems sustain life during the collapse of capitalism, illustrating how informal exchange operated as a survival mechanism embedded within social bonds. The families who built the strongest community networks, who had the most trusted relationships, were consistently the most financially stable throughout the Depression. Not because they had more skills than anyone else, but because they connected people who had skills to people who needed them. In today's world, most people do not know their neighbors at all. Studies show that more than 25% of Americans report having zero close friends in their neighborhood. We have traded community for convenience, but historically, your community is your most valuable financial asset, more valuable than your savings account, more valuable than your investments, because it is the one thing that cannot be taken from you by a bank failure, a stock market crash, or an inflation crisis. The trust skill, building genuine, reliable, mutually beneficial relationships, is not just a nice thing to have. It is historically one of the most powerful economic survival tools ever documented. But there is one skill left. Here it comes. And I promised you at the start that this would be the most important one. The fifth skill is the one that made the biggest difference between families who barely survived the Depression and families who actually came out of it better off than when they went in. And almost nobody has it today. Not because it is hard, not because it is expensive to learn, because we were never taught it. Skill 5. The knowledge of what lasts, the one thing that protected you from every crisis. I want to tell you about Charles Darrow. In 1929, Darrow lost his job as a heating equipment salesman when the economy crashed. He had no income, no backup plan, and a family to feed. So he started playing and refining a board game he'd seen at a party. He spent 2 years perfecting it. Within a year of registering the patent, Parker Brothers was selling 20,000 units a year. Darrow became the world's first millionaire game designer. That game was Monopoly. Darrow did not have money. He had knowledge of what people need during hard times. And what people need during hard times, but what they have always needed, is escape, entertainment, a moment of relief from anxiety, a reason to laugh with their family. The fifth skill is this: knowing what remains valuable when everything changes, and acting on that knowledge before everyone else does. During the Depression, the movie industry boomed. Cinema attendance actually increased during the hardest years because a ticket to the movies cost a dime and gave you 2 hours of escape from reality, as demand for inexpensive entertainment kept the movie business afloat. Mae West emerged as one of the era's biggest box office stars. Cheap food boomed. The first King Cullen supermarket opened in 1930, selling food cheaper than anyone had sold it before. It made a fortune while other businesses collapsed. The skill is not specifically about movies or food. It is about understanding human needs deeply enough to know which ones survive any economic condition. People will always need to eat. People will always need clothing. People will always need repair. People will always need community. People will always need hope and relief from fear. The families who survived the Depression and came out ahead were the families who understood this. They did not chase what was valuable in the good times. They built skills and knowledge around what is always valuable. Here is how this applies to you right now. The economy is changing faster than it ever has. AI is replacing whole categories of jobs. Inflation is eating savings. Housing costs are at historic highs. And 33% of Americans fear total economic collapse. The families of 1933 did not prepare by buying things. They prepared by building skills that could not be taken away. Skills that became more valuable when times got harder. Skills that made them genuinely useful to the people around them. And every single skill I showed you today, repair, food production, sewing and making, community building, and deep knowledge of what lasts, is a skill you can start building this week. Let me bring this together. The people who came through the Depression strongest were not the richest people. They were the most skilled people. The mechanic who fixed what was broken, the seamstress who made something from nothing, the gardener who could feed her family and 11 neighbors, the connector who knew everybody and could be trusted completely, and the thinker who understood what human beings will always need, no matter what. These are not skills from the past. These are skills for what is coming. And here is something I need you to sit with. Every single one of these skills was once taught as a normal part of growing up in America. Every single one was deliberately removed from schools, communities, and mainstream culture over the last 60 years. That is not an accident. The next video is going to show you exactly when that happened, and who decided it, and why the answer is going to make you very angry and very motivated to start building these skills right now. If you want to know the specific skills that survived not just the 1929 Depression, but every economic crisis going back 200 years, that video is already on the channel. I will put it right here. Subscribe, because what is coming in the next few videos is the most important series I have made. And I will see you in the next one.